Imagine a mischievous god. A god who is a liar and a thief. A rogue who regards insolence as a virtue. A god who eavesdrops and tells mind-boggling stories. Imagine a swift and agile god who guides travelers on their way, points out bargains to traders, finds what has been lost, but pilfers possessions. This god is Hermes. He turns up when you least expect him. He vanishes when you thought he was there. Hermes was the final offspring of Zeus's amorous affairs. His mother, Maia, was a glorious goddess. Maia was one of 7 Pleiades, daughters of the giant Atlas, known for their beauty. The Pleiades suffered a tragic fate. They were pursued for many years by a great hunter, a giant, Orion. To protect them, Zeus turned him into a dove, then a star. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, Maia, one of the Pleiades, has sought refuge in the south of Arcadia, far from the gaze of Hera, the legitimate spouse of Zeus. And there, in a cave in Mount Cyllene, Hermes was born. His mother wrapped him in blankets, as was the custom with newborn babies, and placed him in a wicker basket, appointing a nymph as his wet nurse. Hermes, though, was not like other newborn babies. Incredibly precocious, he could already speak and walk. Some hours after his birth, taking advantage of his mother's absence, he slipped out of the cave and set off along the road. In due course, he came to Thessaly, where his elder brother Apollo had been put in charge of a magnificent herd of livestock owned by King Admetus, 12 cows and 100 fabulous heifers with golden horns. Hermes glanced around. There was nobody there. Apollo, as was his wont, was undoubtedly busy seducing beautiful mortal women. Either that, or he was off courting Hymenaeus, a nice young man who had been consuming his thoughts for some time. The opportunity was too good to miss. Theft is easy. The hard part is leaving no clues. To cover his tracks, Hermes concealed his steps by wrapping his feet in foliage, and then, making the animals walk backwards, he purloined them. He took them far away, to the foot of the Mount Pylos, a remote spot in the Peloponnese. The place seemed deserted. Hermes stopped. One cannot be too careful, so after double-checking that no one would surprise him, he curried favor with the gods by sacrificing 2 beasts, cutting them up into 12 parts. He then burnt their carcasses and hid the herd behind a hill before setting off on the return journey to his cave. At this point, all-seeing Zeus decided to make his son the god of thieves and liars. This was the only remaining attribution on Olympus, the one nobody wanted, the one that was left for the youngest of the family. Hermes left Pylos. He set off on the road again, carefree as ever. Soon he was back at his cave. He was just about to enter when he noticed a tortoise lounging in the sun. He observed it for a moment. What could he do with it? Grabbing it, He emptied it of its entrails, and then, across the hollow of the shell, he stretched strings made from the guts of one of the animals he had sacrificed. The first lyre had just been created. The enraptured child took his new toy, hid it in his swaddling clothes, and then went to bed as though nothing had happened. Meanwhile, back in Thessaly, Apollo soon noticed that his herd had vanished. He moved heaven and earth, to no avail. Having scoured the earth from east to west, from north to south, he had no choice but to call in the satyrs. The satyrs were strange creatures, half man and half goat. Well aware of their greed, Apollo promised them a generous reward if they managed to track down his herd and bring him the culprit. That was all it took to scatter the satyrs in every direction, scouring every corner of the world. But they found nothing. The herd seemed to have vanished into thin air. Just as they were about to abandon their quest, there floated up, not far from Mount Selene, music such as they had never heard before. Guided by the melody, they reached the entrance of the cave where they saw Hermes. The nymph stood guard. The satyrs questioned her on the source of this extraordinary music. She explained to them that an unusually gifted child had fashioned a musical instrument out of the carapace of a tortoise and the guts of a cow. Where had these guts come from? The nymph replied that she did not know. The satyrs were about to leave when suddenly one of them spotted the carcass of a heifer lying nearby with golden horns. Intrigued, he had a quick look inside the cave. A child lay drowsing in his cradle. He could not possibly be the thief. The satyrs immediately ran back to report to Apollo. Apollo was astonished. He knew very well who it was in that cave. Hermes, his own stepbrother. Struggling to suppress his anger, Apollo hurried to Maia and demanded that her scoundrel of a son show him where he had hidden his herd. Maia pointed to the child swathed in blankets. "This accusation is absurd. My son is incapable of such a crime." Hermes, who had heard everything, protested in turn his innocence. The notion was ridiculous. He was but a sweet newborn baby. Apollo would hear nothing of it. He grabbed Hermes and dragged him to Zeus, brandishing the carcass of the heifer he had been mindful to secure as a proof. Dawn had not yet broken, and the master of Olympus was still asleep. No matter. Apollo burst into his chamber and took him as his witness. Zeus found it hard to believe that a newborn baby could carry out such a deed. Apollo insisted, became worked up, and produced proof. Finally, Zeus was persuaded. He demanded that Hermes return the herd without delay. He scolded him, lectured him, but deep down, he was delighted by the trick his son had played on the frivolous Apollo. "All right," said Hermes, and promised to return the herd. But he hastened to add that 2 cows would be missing, those he had sacrificed and cut up into 12 equal parts to offer the 12 gods of Olympus. 12 gods? Apollo was surprised, but on Olympus there were only 11. Who was the 12th? "I am," replied Hermes. Apollo spluttered in astonishment. Zeus, though, could scarcely conceal his admiration for a child who was proving to be a very interesting character indeed. Before setting off on his way, Hermes picked up the lyre he had fashioned and began to improvise a tune. Apollo was captivated. These new harmonious sounds struck a chord in his heart. The god Apollo was the patron of artists, musicians, and poets. The song filled him with wonder. So much so that he soon forgot all his grievances against his young stepbrother, and singing to himself along the way, fell in behind Hermes and followed him to the place where the herd was hidden. Things seemed to be returning to normal. Apollo, though, was hesitant. Since leaving the cave, he had been haunted by the instrument that produced this wonderful music. He became obsessed with it. "Keep the heifers," he suddenly proposed to Hermes, "and in exchange, I shall take the lyre." Hermes smiled. He accepted the proposition. The brothers shook hands. Henceforth, the two would never be parted. And as if to beguile Apollo yet further, Hermes went over to a bank of reeds, plucked one out, and carved a flute, on which he began to play another tune. Dazzled, Apollo could not help proposing another deal. If his brother gave him this flute, in return he would hand over the golden shepherd's staff he used for grazing his herd. This time the child protested, "Out of the question." It seems Hermes had already developed an acute business sense. "My flute is worth much more than a staff, even a golden one. I shall only accept if you teach me to predict the future." "Impossible," exclaimed Apollo. And indeed, although a god, Apollo was unable to transmit his power to another. It was given to him by the Three-Eye, the bee-nymphs, who lived in the temple of Delphos. They and they alone could school his brother in the art of prophecy. "Then so be it," replied Hermes. "I shall go and see the bee-nymphs." He set off for Delphos, and there, in the sacred sanctuary of Apollo, Hermes received his education. Hermes had become an accomplished god by the time Zeus summoned him to Olympus. No sooner had he arrived than the master of Olympus was showering him with compliments. He told him he was ingenious, eloquent, and persuasive. Hermes saw his opportunity. He implored his father to allow him to become the god responsible for the security of divine properties on Olympus, in exchange for which he vowed never to lie again, adding that he was not sure he would always be able to tell the truth. Zeus smiled and accepted. He then gave him a magical staff with 2 snakes entwined around it. The snakes represent the opposition between life and death, Olympus and hell. This was the forerunner of the caduceus. He then added to his outfit a wide-brimmed hat to protect him from the rain during his missions, and gold-winged sandals able to transport him with the speed of the wind. Hermes was ready. Zeus appointed him as an intercessor between mortals and the divine. He thus made him the sole messenger to the great Hades, lord of the underworld. Hermes became the conveyor of souls, the one named Psychopompos. And contrary to all expectations, Hermes set about his tasks with unparalleled zeal. Day after day, he could be seen kindly escorting the dead through the underworld, accompanying them where no one dared venture. But that was not all. The young god would also act as a patron of trade, as well as ensuring the free passage of the world's travelers and wayfarers. Hermes gave help to merchants and traders. He advised them, helped them fetch the best prices, always quick to lend a little of the eloquence and loquaciousness that would allow them to sell anything and talk their way out of any situation. Hermes' reasoning was very often fueled by dishonesty. Indeed, he acknowledged as much himself. What matters is not so much telling the truth as saying something pleasing. Hermes then placed himself at Zeus's disposal. What would he not do to please his father? On many occasions, he helped him outmaneuver the wiles of the possessive Hera when she turned against the mistresses of her unfaithful husband or his numerous illegitimate children. Thus was he given the infant Dionysus at birth. And later, when Paris, the Trojan prince, was charged with judging who was the most beautiful between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, it was Hermes, on orders from Zeus, who brought the three goddesses to him. As we have seen, while he was still just a newborn baby, Hermes was already up to many tricks. Later, Zeus's heart became lost to the beautiful Alcmene, the wife of Amphitryon. But Alcmene's faithfulness was her prime virtue. It had to be broken. Using Hermes as his accomplice, Zeus took on the appearance of Amphitryon, and while he slid into Alcmene's arms, Hermes ordered the sun to extinguish itself and not rise the following day. Thus did the ill-fated Alcmene expend her passion in all innocence in the arms of her so-called husband for 3 whole days. Sometime later, Zeus again called his son to the rescue. He had a new mistress, Io. But Hera, his wife, had turned the unfortunate woman into a heifer and made her the captive of Argus, a giant. At the request of Zeus, Hermes went to the giant. Now this giant did not have 2 eyes. He had 100. But Hermes always had a ruse up his sleeve, and he managed to put the giant to sleep by telling him endless stories and mind-boggling tales. Once he was sure that all of the giant's eyes were closed, he cut off his head. Hermes' reputation spread rapidly throughout Greece, and he began to appear on wayside markers, piles of stones called Herma. Topped by a bust of the god, they indicated directions to be taken or the names of places. An indefatigable messenger, Hermes was involved in everything and meddled wherever he could. Athletes, who regarded him as the inventor of racing, paid tribute to him. And shepherds, keeping in mind the crimes of his youth, made him the protector of their herds, deeming it better to entrust the safety of their animals to a thieving god than to be robbed by him. But while he readily helped the gods, Hermes was never their servant. He was far too impertinent, far too free, and much too playful for that. On Olympus, he was well liked, and much fun could be had with him, but he often irritated. Always the practical joker, he stole the bow and arrows of Cupid, the god of love. He stole Poseidon's trident, Zeus's scepter, Hephaestus's tongs, and even Aphrodite's magical girdle, the belt that inspired desire in mortals and immortals alike. Aphrodite. How to resist her? We're in Lemnos. The goddess of beauty was married to the blacksmith god Hephaestus. Having discovered that his wife was cheating on him, he successfully trapped her and her lover, Ares, in a bronze net. He then summoned all the divinities of Olympus so that they may be witness to the adultery. Hermes was one of those present at the gathering. Like all males, he was duly beguiled by the goddess's beauty, and let it be known he would be happy to be in Ares's place, despite the bronze net. Aphrodite overheard him. Flattered, before escaping Olympus, she offered herself to him for a whole night. Their embraces brought forth a two-sexed child, half male, half female, named Hermaphroditus. Hermaphroditus was neither wholly man nor wholly woman, but both at the same time. Alas, his nature would prevent him enjoying any form of reciprocal love. Later, Hermes would seduce the daughter of the princess Dryope, and together they would produce the god Pan. Half goat, half man, a god so ugly that his wet nurse fled at the sight of him. Secret agent, diplomat, philanderer, entertainer, thief, an out-and-out rogue. He was naturally one of the best-loved gods among mortals. He was capable of deceiving men just as he was of helping them. Impossible to tell whether his intention was to deceive or help. Hermes was the messenger of the gods, but only the very smartest knew how to interpret his true intentions. His emblem was two interlaced snakes. He was a god who combined truth and lies, hell and Olympus. A god who, by definition, was impenetrable. He was the inscrutable messenger.